just me, the underconfident human, the internet, YouTube's, and certainly the world's least relevant human. Welcome. You know, today is a mildly auspicious occasion for me because I'm taking a hobby of mine and turning it into a little more fun, I guess you could say. This, by the way, for those of you that don't know what you're looking at, this is an ASMR channel. That means quiet as best as is possible. So, I bought a website. That's right, I have a web domain of my own. www.dmg01photography.com. I have signed up with a picture gallery slash portfolio site called SlickPick. And SlickPick is pretty basic, pretty comfortable, and sort of my own playground. Really just a glorified Instagram for me. It is a platform where actual photographers who take themselves seriously put up their portfolios and, sell prints and showcase their work. So I'm quite sure from their perspective, I'm just poisoning the pond. Anyway, so yeah, I have taken a piece of my childhood and turned it into another type of hobby. Not the first time in my life. So, I've been out shooting, getting photos, carefully placing myself and taking my time with a very fantastic piece of hardware, which I would like to start with before I get into my traveling bag here, my camera bag. Yes, as ridiculous as it probably sounds, I have a camera bag and some supplies, which we're going to explore the contents of this bag very shortly. But before we do, I need to explain what's going on. Do you know what this is? You ever seen one of these before? It depends on your age, perhaps, because real young ones have not. This is the Game Boy, the original 1989 gray brick Game Boy. Its model number DMG-01. You see, when I was a kid, I had one of these Game Boys, and I kind of lived on it, kind of carried it everywhere, never left home without it if I had a choice. And if I didn't have a choice, I always had my cassette player with me anyway, because I was always plugged into music. But anyway, I had a Nintendo NES. Later on, I had a Super Nintendo, but I'm telling you, the amount of time I spent playing on these units, the DMG-01 Game Boy is iconic in the world around us, sure. For me personally, it's more than iconic. It's very special. I'm telling you, the struggle we had to go through to see this thing in anything other than a perfectly lit room. They made these little light units you could clip onto it and all these things because it was just a monochrome dot matrix screen. I mean, as basic as it gets, but we are talking about 1989. Now, the Game Boy, of course, moved forward and evolved. You know, later they had the Play It Loud Game Boy, which was an upgrade, and then the Game Boy Pocket, the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Pocket was basically the same machine, but a thinner, say a fairly thinner form factor, not super thin compared to today's standards. But and then the Game Boy Color was the first one to have a color screen. I'm trying to think. There was a Game Boy Micro, which was the only Game Boy that wasn't compatible with the camera, which we're getting to that as years moved on. Then, you know, we had the Game Boy Advance and the Advance SP and the 3DS and etc., etc., etc. So, anyway, the King Daddy, the first one of the group, was the 1989, the original DMG-01. Now, going forward from 1989, flash forward to 1998. Nintendo created a toy, a device for the Game Boy units called the Gameboy Camera. In Japan, they called it Pocket Camera. I suspect because it came out at around the same time the Game Boy Pocket did. But in America, it was called the Game Boy Camera. What it could do. Try to remember the era here, and for those of you too young to, that weren't there and have no idea, 1998, the Game Boy Camera was a cool invention because it allowed people at a time when digital cameras were definitely not a thing. Like, nobody had digital cameras. I don't even know if those were on the regular consumer market that much yet, And if they were, I would have to guess they were stupid expensive. But anyway, this cartridge-based camera that plugs into the Game Boys. This is a 128 pixel by 128 pixel 2-bit, 2 bits, not 8-bit or 16-bit, 2-bit CMOS sensor, camera sensor. Being 2 bits, it only supports a 4-color palette, and as you might have guessed, especially with the original Game Boys not having color at all, it is based on monochrome, basically white, black, and in between shades of gray. With brightness and stuff, those were slightly, bendable, but basically 128 pixels by 128 pixels, 2-bit, 4 colors, that's it. So what this produced were these really low-end, low-resolution, almost grainy, dithery, black and white photos. And it was super awesome, like it was a fun toy. Alongside this, they released a device called the Game Boy Printer, which also plugged into the connectivity port, the expansion port on various Game Boy units to print. And this printer was thermal based, like receipt printers. It's thermal, it doesn't use ink, it burns at different layers, it burns the image into the paper rather than print on it. So, 1998, Game Boy Camera. Now, long before that, when I was playing one of these, the 1989 Game Boy, that thing didn't exist yet, but it was still compatible with it, as you saw. You know, in a unbelievable stroke of genius and good fortune, I guess, for those of us that were alive in that era, the Game Boy Camera and the printer were compatible with the DMG all the way up through the Advance. Once they got to Nintendo 3DS and all that, it was done because the cartridges, the game cartridge, did not fit, obviously. But any of them, you know, to go back almost a decade, you know, they put out this device, and we're almost, 9 years, but we're almost a decade past that. Many generations of Game Boy units created and evolved since then, and they made this compatible with every single one of them that carried the name Game Boy. Even the Super Nintendo had an adapter cartridge called the Super Game Boy that would let you play your Game Boy games on the big screen, and the camera was even compatible with that. So, anyway, as a kid, I did not have a Game Boy Camera when these came out. I vaguely remember the commercials being on TV for these, but I didn't have one, and I'm 99% certain I didn't have interest in one, the camera, at that particular point in time. And I had a few Game Boys over the course of my time. I think my favorite, personally, was the Advance SP, which the camera is compatible with that, though it's upside down. Inside the camera software, though, there is an option to flip the view, so that works. And then there's also a adapter device that some third-party companies have made in later years that will allow you to plug the camera in, and the port, it flips it up so you can still use the camera upright. Anyway, long story short, while I had several Game Boys over the course of my childhood, nothing is quite, especially now that I'm much older, nothing is quite as iconic as the original DMG-01. So, 2016, you're probably wondering what this is about. A couple of my Game Boys have these stereo RCA outputs, very aftermarket. It's called a Pro Sound mod. I was writing chiptune once upon a time with LSDJ, Little Sound DJ, which, if you want to look it up, is a free ROM that turns any compatible Game Boy unit into a full-fledged studio. You can program drum machines, synthesizers, you can upload samples into the ROM, just a whole multitude of things to write music. So I really went through a phase where I wanted to make myself learn LSDJ and write, a chiptune album. And guess what? Of all the Game Boys I could have done it with, I did it with my childhood DMG-01, because crappy screen, and then now there's aftermarket mods for these to put modern IPS LCD screens in it, and for the older dot matrix, there's backlights that you can mod these with, just lots of mods. So anyways, I guess back to the matter. In far more recent times, I decided that I was interested in checking out the Game Boy Camera, because I, occasionally will see photos on Instagram or something, people toying with these. It's all a big laugh, right? I picked up one and decided I really thought this was cool. Like, I think it makes some really cool art, very minimalistic, almost impressionist art style. And so my simple wheels got to turning, and lo and behold, I now have an actual, photography photography webpage, and I am focused on enjoying myself by just getting out and finding things that catch my eye, something I want to capture. And I have, preferences on positioning and how a photo should look, what's in it, what's centered in it, and what's not. So, I'm no photographer at all and no training whatsoever, so it's literally just a hobby for fun. Okay? I do not take myself all that seriously. But yeah, I have several, certainly not from recent times. I've been collecting a long time, but I have several DMG01 Game Boys. Some that are not modified at all, some that are just Pro Sound modified like this, and then I have a couple special ones that I carry for my photography. Same with the Gameboy Camera. I've bought quite a few of these. Some US version and some Japanese ones. And guess what else? Of course I took it apart. I desoldered the lithium-ion batteries that kept the save memory working on these old cartridges and replaced them all. So every one of my cameras now have a reasonably fresh lithium-ion battery in it, replacing the old one, so the memory's good. The sensors have all been cleaned and maintained. I've put a lot of time into this so that I could make this hobby work. So, www.dmgphotography.com. dmg01photography.com. I have my own website. That's fun. So, let's get into what I've been traveling around with as I've been working on building a bit of a gallery. I'll start with the side pocket. Pocket. Side, I have a couple of cameras. I have one purple translucent case, which this one is Japanese only. And yes, the software on this is in Japanese, and I don't read Japanese, but this and the US version are really identical. Everything's in the same place. It's not like you have to do a lot of reading to adjust things like the dither and the contrast and the brightness and some of the other options that you have. They're all in the same place. So, no big deal. But I have a Japanese edition, which, again, they called them the pocket camera. And then in the US, we have the Gameboy Camera. And, it's fun. I did this on purpose. These were released in a few colors. There was like a red, and a green, and a blue, and I think there was a yellow. And the color was all solid. You have the color of the sticker, the unit, and the back casing. Well, you notice anything funny? Since I took the time to disassemble numerous Game Boy cameras, clean everything, clean the lens and all that, and replace all the, re-solder some new batteries, I intentionally switched it up on purpose. I have a red shell on a blue camera. See, that's nerdism at its finest. But that whole side pocket holds a couple of these. Now, why am I carrying multiples? Are they different? Does the Japanese and the American camera take different kinds of photos? Nope. Not really. Same specs. Same camera sensor on the inside. The reason I carry multiples is because these old faithful units only hold 30 pictures total. That's it. 30 pictures. And once the memory's full, you're out of luck. So, as I'm taking multiple shots of things trying to get the perfect image, I gotta sometimes switch out and grab a different cartridge to keep it going. As you might have guessed already, on the other side pocket, side has room for two more. And you see what I did my thing again. See how this one's got a red lens and a red label, but blue shell. I switched them out on purpose again. And then this one, blue sticker, blue shell, red camera unit. So this right here, in the short term, 3, 6, 9, 12, 120 photos I can take on the spot. Or, if one of these units should fail, since they are quite old, it's good to have some backups on hand. Now, you're probably asking, well, cameras with you, how do you get the pictures off of them? That leads me to the front pocket. In the front, I have a little bit of a different beast going. First of all, this pouch, this is actually designed to carry bullets, but in my case, batteries. Indeed, the good old classic MG01 Game Boy takes 4 alkaline batteries. There wasn't rechargeable lithium-ion battery packs for the original Game Boy back in 1989. I think we had rechargeable alkaline batteries that were more expensive, but when it came to the Game Boy, those were quite unreliable, because if it even started losing charge, weird things would happen. batteries, enough sets of brand new batteries, so I can keep charged up if I have to. This is a luxury. It's certainly a little bit overkill. But, again, the device takes 4 batteries, and mine, the ones I'm using to shoot with, are modified. They require more juice. They go through batteries faster than the original Game Boy did on its own, just for the display and whatnot. But yeah. AA batteries. It's even got the straps if I wanted to wear it on my belt, which, of course, I'm not doing that. Couple of quickies. USB-C to USB-A and USB-C to USB-C. I keep a couple of USB cables in here. Why? The Game Boy didn't work with USB. USB wasn't even out on the market when the Game Boy was around, or the Game Boy Camera. What gives, right? Well, this device represents quite a pride point for me. You see, back in the day, if you wanted to extract images from your Game Boy Camera, well, guess what? You couldn't. You either had to print them off with a Game Boy printer, or you were able to transfer pictures from one Game Boy to another Game Boy with a link cable. But that was it. There was no way to get pictures off of them at first. Now, eventually, a company that was pretty popular and used to make a lot of third-party peripherals for everything gaming related, called Wildcats, made a device that you could plug the Game Boy cartridge into a Windows 98 computer and somehow copy images off that way. I've never seen one of those in person. I have no clue how they even work for sure, because I don't think, especially going back that far, that it was just a plug-and-play type of thing. Now, later on, the blessed homebrew community started making software and making things that you could get images from a Game Boy Camera. One of the techniques used to copy images from a Game Boy Camera was called printer emulation, which is exactly that, printer emulation. Making the Game Boy, the Game Boy software on the cartridge believe that it was outputting your image to a Game Boy printer, but instead it was being digitally duplicated. So, fake printing a pure digital image for the most part. And that was a very popular technique, still is. There are still devices that do that. Lots of software emulators that you can run on your phone or your tablet or whatever for Game Boys. Game Boy games have printer emulation. So if you wanted to get a picture, you told it to print it, and it would still take its sweet time, because that's just how the software worked, real slowly. And would print your picture out, but it would just be that monochrome image, faked. You know what I mean? But a couple of things exist, like this glorious, wonderful device right here. This is called the Benvin Joey Jr. version 2 plus plus. Benven is a company that has been around for quite a while and makes a lot of Game Boy homebrew stuff. Flash cartridges for you to flash games onto, and different hardware mods that you could solder onto the Game Boys. Just lots of stuff. The Benven Joey Jr. version 2 plus plus is the most up-to-date current iteration of the Joey. The Joey Jr. is a cartridge flasher, a cartridge extractor, and, of course, also supports the Game Boy Camera. With this device, you can copy ROMs, you can, manage any kind of flash cartridge, and it's USB-C driven. Its current software is plug and play. Beautiful thing. No weird third-party drivers needed. No software needed. You don't need a special desktop app or a syncing app. It's plug and play. And it has firmware that automatically detects what is plugged into it and then presents you your folders or your data accordingly. And this is such a wonderful, worth every penny, because since it auto-recognizes what is plugged into it, it even recognizes the Game Boy Camera. The original bit there, as I said earlier, 128 pixel lossless bitmap images. Now, the CMOS sensor of the camera is 128 by 128, but when you snap the photo, they're actually stored as 128 by 112. Okay? 128 by 112 lossless bitmap with a 2-bit depth. So, when plugged into this, I can directly copy those bitmaps to my laptop or my tablet or even my phone. Can plug right into my phone, dump all the pictures, and then go back in and start over again. Have a fresh Game Boy camera to snap more pictures with. But that process does take a minute. Whereas if I'm out shooting and I'm in a hurry, I don't want to stop and pull out my phone and pull out the cable and copy all the files. No, instead I turn off the Game Boy, put one Game Boy camera in my bag, pull out another, click it in, kick it on, and keep going. Much more faster and efficient, right? But as I said, though, the Benven Joey is a pride point and a key piece of my whole hobby, because I wanted to do Game Boy photography, pure, authentic, honest, and original, no emulators. Yes, sure, I could pull out my phone and load up the Game Boy Camera ROM in an emulator and take pictures with that, and it would work just fine, for the most part. Quite a camera upgrade, but since the software only works at 128 by 128, that's all the pictures would be anyway. But obviously, I believe even at the limitations of the actual software, it'd probably still be better pictures just because the lens are more modern and everything. I don't know. I don't want to use emulators. No emulators. I want to do just like my chiptune. When I was writing chiptunes, which, if you don't know, chiptune is a genre of electronic music that is written and produced and performed on extremely vintage hardware, like a Game Boy or an Atari or a Commodore 64 or an Amiga computer, what have you. But just like then, I wanted to do it on real hardware, which is why I had my Game Boys modified, so I could record the real thing, performed on the real thing. So with my photos, authentic, no emulation, and that includes printer emulation. I think that in the most technical sense, using printer emulation is probably producing the exact same results in the end. But I don't want any emulation. I want the real thing, and I mean as real from every metric as is possible. So, no printer emulation. This lets me extract the bitmaps directly from the storage. Right from the storage. No printing images to emulate them. It's the real deal. I love this thing. Like I said, the Ben Joey Jr. is a key piece of all of this for me, because I don't want to extract my images with printer emulation. I'm sorry, I just don't. And I sure as hell do not want to use an emulator on a modern device. I want pure and authentic hardware, pure and authentic software, period. So that's the front pocket. USB cables, backup batteries, and my Joey. Set. I think you might dig this. In the top, the main pocket. Given where I'm sitting, this might be hard to demonstrate. There is a removable Velcro divider in there that I can place any way I want. Horizontally, vertically, whichever shape and direction I want. I have it set up in a square so that my Game Boys are held upright and locked in there pretty safely and surrounded by softness, so I don't want to scratch the screens up. My main shooter is right here. There she is. This DMG01, do you see a difference between the screens? This one has a modern IPS LCD screen. The screen, of course, has nothing whatsoever to do with image capturing, processing, rendering, or whatever you want to call it. This one is more my favorite Game Boy to play old Game Boy games on. Just because having a lit IPS LCD, you can see everything a lot better without changing the key hardware. Because again, the CPU, the motherboard, everything is original Game Boy DMG01. So I'm not cheating as far as any of the software goes. Now, the one thing I am cheating with this is that we've gone from a plastic screen protector to glass. This is glass, and then behind it is the LCD. It makes a way better viewfinder, especially in varying light conditions. So let me show you. Since I've got this one sitting out, I'll plug in the Japanese one. I'm going to turn the volume down on this so it's silent. See how that looks? We can actually see the screen. really see this very well, but so this makes it so much easier to see what I'm taking pictures of. And the software has lots of sub-menus, just really cool features. I mean, you can distort the images in various ways. You can apply frames, all sorts of built-in frames to the pictures, and stickers and stamps and text. Lots of fun little toys. But yeah, this one is my screen modded Game Boy, which again, I primarily like this one for playing games and for my camera, because that screen I can see a lot better compared to the other one I keep with me for some nostalgia reasons. This DMG01 is a Pro Sound modified unit as well. It has a black shell instead of the stock gray, but this still has the dot matrix screen. I wrote an entire chiptune album on this Game Boy back in 2016, this unit. The thing about the dot matrix displays is now we're looking at this, and I don't know if you can even see it. I can use the scroll wheel to change the contrast. I'm doing it maybe a little too fast for the camera, but this one has the original dot matrix display, the original Game Boy dot matrix display, but it's got a modification for a backlight. Again, the original gray brick Game Boy did not have that. It was just a dot matrix screen with no light. As ridiculous as that sounds now, this was still some king shit in my childhood. I'm guessing we can't see that at all at this point, but the camera software is up right now. It's in camera mode. I can take pictures with this. So of course, the question then, well, why? If you have a vintage unit with an updated screen, why would you use one that still has a dot matrix screen to take pictures? See, I use them both. The reason being is strictly for nostalgia purposes. Sometimes my eyes just like the struggle. I feel good looking at the old, very hard to see dot matrix display. And I mean, I'm not 8 years old or whatever anymore, 10 years old. I'm, in my mid-40s. So anything that should help me see easier would be the ideal choice, I guess. But sometimes I just get in the mood. Definitely just in the mood to see the old display. And the backlight on this, as you saw, is blue because that's the color I chose for keeping the original dot matrix screen. There's a ton of backlight mods. You can get them in any color. You can do red, pink, blue, yellow, white. It doesn't matter. Whatever color you want. And then, as far as the shell, the body goes, okay, this one does have custom buttons and a custom glass screen protector, because this layout right here was the original color scheme, a gray body with sort of these purple buttons, whereas back in 2016, that was actually 2015 that I did this Game Boy, but it wasn't until 2016 I wrote the album. But anyway, I got black buttons and a black cover expansion port. Now, in terms of the body of these Game Boys, there's a gazillion shells out there. You can get them transparent. You can get them in any color, and all kinds of designs. Pokemon themed ones, Star Wars themed ones, just whatever. Chances are, if you look hard enough, you can and think of something, it probably exists. I didn't want any of that. Being a bit of a purist and a grouchy old man, I guess, I have always wanted to keep the original gray body. Just because I look at that gray, plain, bland color of the body of these things, and I have a warm place in my heart for it. So anyway, because of the way I have this laid out currently, I could fit probably 4 Game Boys in here. I don't want to carry 4 Game Boys with me. 2 is enough, and they're comfortable, secured, and in a soft place. And I have something to suit both of my moods that will not prevent me from shooting. That's why I chose this one for my dot matrix display, because this one's backlit. And if I chose one that's not backlit, like this one's OG, other than the sound mod. Like this one has the original display with no light whatsoever. This would prevent me from shooting if, like, it was any reason I needed even a speck of light. Any shade or something, like if I was under a shade tree, I'd be in trouble. So, But anyway, there you have it. That's the main chamber of my camera bag. I have one backlit dot matrix and one fully self-lit IPS LCD display. And again, other than the Pro Sound mod on this and some different buttons, the internals of both of these Game Boys is otherwise 100% original. Nothing to give it more processing power, nothing to speed it up, none of that kind of stuff. It is all original, which ties back to what I've been ranting and raving about far too much in this damn video already. Authenticity, purity. I have tinkered once or twice with my Game Boy Advance SP just to see what it would look like, and a Game Boy Pocket, and it produces the same images, it seems, no matter what. But if I'm gonna go and take the time to create kind of a photography gallery, I might as well do it precisely the way I want it. And what I want is my childhood Game Boy to do the pictures. So you have my brand, DMG01 Photography. That's me. In some recesses of the internet in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was also known as the Dark Reverend Zio. Zio is an alias that I will never tell anyone the story. Like, no one knows the story of where that came from. Because if I did tell people, they would think I'm even more insane than they probably already do. And it's very personal. Besides, that nickname, that alias, that's a key part. But anyways, the Dark Reverend Zio, the owner of DMG01 Photography. And there you have, anyway, a very long, drawn-out tour of my simple camera bag. 2 Game Boy cameras, 2 more Game Boy cameras, including a Japanese model, 2 DMG01 Game Boys, both styles of USB cable, extra batteries, and of course the Joey. If I was going to be on a trip or out for an extended period, you know what I mean? Like, if the need arose, then yes, I'd have to sit in my car for a minute, plug the Joey into my phone, and dump the images out of the memory. But otherwise, like I said, I switch them in and out, and I have extras. I mean, I have a couple extra cameras laying around, and if I to a couple extra Game Boys. I have one other Game Boy, very similar, the DMG01, that still has the original dot matrix, but has a white backlight. That one, though, I actually don't like the look of it. I think it's worse. So the blue one is my favorite for, dot matrix. Those that hung out through my incessant rambling, thank you for hanging out with me. I actually do appreciate the company, such as it is, because I promise you in real life, no one hangs out with me. But, anyway, yeah, if you're curious, want to take a quick peek, there's no harm. You can go to my website, my brand spanking new website, which is hosted on SlickPic, but I own my domain. Also, I do have, I created a separate, if you will, Instagram page to also post some of my Game Boy pictures. I can't organize Instagram in the same way that I can galleries on SlickPic, so it's not going to be as nice. But, DMG01 _ cameraman. The DMG01 cameraman. That's my Instagram for this project. Otherwise, yeah, dmgo1photography.com. That's me. Anyway, thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you when I see you. This is the Underconfident Human, signing out.